Elon Musk watches twins sell dollhouse to save mom. What he found out shocked everyone. In the heart of Palo Alto, two little girls sit in a sunlit park clutching a worn-out dollhouse, not as a toy, but as their last hope. Hungry, desperate, and determined, they are willing to give up the only treasure they own to save the person they love most. But when a stranger stops, a man known to the world, but a ghost in his own heart, something shifts. What begins as a simple act of kindness spirals into a connection neither side expected. As walls built over years of loss start to crack, an unthinkable question arises. Can one chance meeting heal wounds that were never meant to mend? And just when you think you know where the story leads, it will break you, lift you, and leave you breathless. Sparkle, stay with us, because some stories don't just unfold. They change everything. Subscribe now so you don't miss a moment. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Rinconada Park in Palo Alto, where two small figures sat huddled on a worn blanket. Sophie and Claire, identical twins with golden hair that caught the light like spun silk, clutched a beautiful dollhouse between them. Their fingers, delicate as flower petals, traced the miniature shingles and tiny painted shutters with the reverence of someone saying goodbye to a beloved friend. They were hungry. So terribly hungry that their stomachs had stopped growling hours ago, settling into a hollow ache that had become as familiar as breathing. But hunger was nothing compared to the weight of responsibility pressing down on their 7-year-old shoulders. "Mama needs medicine," Sophie whispered to her sister, her voice barely audible above the rustle of autumn leaves. Claire nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears that she refused to let fall. They had made a pact that morning, standing in their tiny kitchen while their mother lay burning with fever in the next room. They would sell their most precious possession. They would save her. The dollhouse had been their Christmas gift the year before, when their father was still alive, when their world still made sense. Now it represented hope. $300, the man at the toy store had said. $300 that could buy the medicine their mother desperately needed. But hope, they were learning, was a fragile thing. Person after person walked by, each lost in their own universe of smartphone screens and hurried destinations. Business executives in pristine suits glanced down with barely concealed annoyance. Joggers swerved around them as if they were obstacles in a race that couldn't be stopped. Mothers with strollers offered sympathetic smiles, but kept walking, their own children's needs pulling them forward like invisible chains. "Excuse me," Sophie would call out, her voice growing smaller with each rejection. "Would you like to buy our dollhouse?" Claire would lift the intricate toy, its windows catching the fading light like tiny promises. But promises, they were discovering, were easily broken. The hours stretched on. The shadows grew longer. And still they sat there, two small guardians of a treasure that no one seemed to want. Then he appeared. Elon Musk walked through the park like a man carrying the weight of worlds on his shoulders. His usual confident stride was slower today, more contemplative. Perhaps it was the meeting he'd just left, another discussion about Mars colonization that had left him feeling oddly disconnected from Earth. Or maybe it was the email from his ex-wife, reminding him that he'd missed another school play, another bedtime story, another chance to be the father he'd always imagined he could be. He almost didn't notice them. Almost. But something made him stop. Maybe it was the way the dying sunlight painted their hair like halos. Maybe it was the careful way they held their dollhouse, as if it were made of dreams and spider silk. Or maybe it was simply the universe deciding that this moment, this intersection of paths, was meant to be. "Excuse me, sir." Sophie stood up, her legs trembling slightly from sitting so long. "Would you like to buy our dollhouse?" Elon turned, and for a moment, time seemed to pause. He saw them clearly then. These two small angels with dirt-streaked faces and eyes that held too much knowledge for their age. He saw the careful way they'd arranged their blanket, the handwritten sign that read, "For sale," in crayon letters that broke his heart. He saw the love in their eyes when they looked at each other, the fierce protectiveness that reminded him of his own children. "It's very beautiful," he said, kneeling down to their level. His voice was gentler than it had been in months. "Why are you selling it?" The twins exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them. Claire stepped forward, her small hand resting on the dollhouse's red roof. "Our mama is sick," she said simply. "She needs medicine and we don't have money." Something cracked open in Elon's chest. Something that had been sealed away behind meetings and spreadsheets and the relentless pursuit of tomorrow. He thought of his own mother, of the sacrifices she'd made. He thought of his children, safe in their comfortable beds, never knowing the weight of adult worries. "How much?" he asked, though he already knew that price didn't matter. $300, Sophie said, her voice barely a whisper. The man at the store said it's worth $300. Elon reached into his wallet, his hands moving with a certainty that surprised him. He pulled out bills, more than they'd asked for, more than they'd dreamed of. "Keep the dollhouse," he said, pressing the money into Sophie's small palm. "Your mama needs you to have something beautiful too." The twins stared at the money, then at him, then at each other. Tears finally spilled over, running down their cheeks like small rivers of relief. They threw their arms around him, this strange man who had appeared like an answer to their desperate prayers. "Thank you," they whispered against his shirt. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." As they gathered their blanket and their precious dollhouse, chattering excitedly about the medicine they could buy, about how Mama would get better, Elon felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. Not the grand cosmic purpose of colonizing Mars or revolutionizing transportation, but something smaller and infinitely more precious. The purpose of being exactly where he was needed, exactly when he was needed. He watched them walk away, their small figures growing smaller against the darkening sky. Something inside him stirred, a feeling he couldn't quite name. These weren't just two children who had sold him a story along with their dollhouse. They were two souls who had reminded him what it meant to be human. "Follow them," he said quietly to his driver, his voice carrying an urgency that surprised them both. "But keep your distance." The black sedan crept through the twilight streets, following the twins as they made their way through neighborhoods that grew progressively shabbier. The manicured lawns of Palo Alto gave way to cracked sidewalks and broken streetlights. The twins moved with the confidence of children who knew these streets, who had learned to navigate a world that hadn't always been kind to them. They stopped at a building that seemed to sag with weariness. The paint was peeling, the windows were cracked, and the front door hung slightly askew on its hinges. This was home. This was where their sick mother waited for miracle medicine that two small girls had somehow managed to find. Elon sat in his car for a long moment, staring at the building. He could turn around now. He could drive back to his mansion, his comfortable life, his world of luxury and innovation. He could tell himself that giving the money was enough, that his conscience was clear. But those eyes, those trusting, desperate, hopeful eyes. He got out of the car. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Elon's mansion, casting rainbows across marble floors that had known only the echo of solitary footsteps for years. Now those same floors vibrated with something entirely different. Laughter. The sound of small feet racing up and down hallways that had forgotten what joy sounded like. Sophie and Claire moved through the mansion like two butterflies discovering a garden they'd only dreamed of. Their eyes, wide with wonder, took in every detail. The chandelier that hung like a constellation of stars. The staircase that curved like something from a fairy tale. The library with its endless shelves of books that seemed to reach toward heaven itself. "Look, Claire," Sophie whispered, her fingers barely grazing the silk curtains that cost more than their family had ever seen. "It's like living inside a dream." Claire nodded, her small hand pressed against the cool marble of a statue that stood guard in the foyer. "Do you think Mama will like it here when she gets better?" The question hung in the air like a prayer, delicate and hopeful and heartbreaking all at once. Meanwhile, Elon had transformed overnight from a man who conquered worlds to someone who conquered medical bureaucracy with the same relentless determination. His phone calls now weren't about rocket launches or electric vehicles. They were about blood tests and cardiologists and the best heart specialists money could summon. "I don't care what it costs," he said into his phone, pacing his office while watching the twins through his window as they explored the garden. "I want Dr. Martinez flown in from Johns Hopkins. Today." His assistant, who had worked for him for 5 years, had never heard this tone in his voice. This wasn't the cold efficiency of a business transaction. This was personal. This was desperate. This was a man who had found something worth fighting for. Mrs. Portman, the governanta who had maintained the pristine emptiness of the mansion for the past 3 years, watched this transformation with eyes that missed nothing. She had seen him in his darkest moments, had witnessed the way grief had hollowed him out like a storm carving through a mountainside. But now, as she watched him kneel down to tie Sophie's shoelaces at breakfast, she saw something she had thought was lost forever. She saw him smile. Really smile. "Mr. Musk never eats breakfast," she confided to her sister during their weekly phone call. "For 3 years, just coffee and the newspaper. But this morning, he sat at that big dining table with those little girls, and they were teaching him how to make pancakes into shapes. He made a rocket, of course, but when Claire made a heart, he got this look in his eyes, like he was remembering something beautiful he'd forgotten." The breakfast table, which had been a monument to solitude, became a place of discovery. Sophie would ask endless questions about the stars, about rockets, about whether people really could live on Mars. Claire, quieter but no less curious, would watch Elon's face when he answered, as if she were memorizing every expression. "What's in the room upstairs that's always locked?" Claire asked one morning, her spoon halfway to her mouth, syrup dripping like golden tears. The question hit Elon like a physical blow. His coffee cup trembled in his hands. "It's just storage," he said quickly, his voice rougher than usual. "Nothing interesting. Just old things I don't need anymore." But Claire's eyes, those perceptive eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul, lingered on his face. She didn't believe him. She was 7 years old, but she understood that some doors stayed locked for reasons that had nothing to do with storage. The daily visits to the hospital became a ritual that bound them together in ways none of them expected. Elon would drive them there himself, no longer trusting drivers with this precious cargo. In the back seat, the twins would hold hands and whisper prayers for their mother, their voices so soft they sounded like angel wings brushing against hope. When Emily finally woke up, truly woke up, her eyes clear and fever-free for the first time in weeks, she cried. Not from pain, but from gratitude that felt too big for her healing heart to contain. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered to Elon, her voice still weak, but filled with emotion that made his chest tight. "You saved my life. You saved my girls." Sophie and Claire, perched on either side of their mother's hospital bed like protective guardians, talked over each other in their excitement to tell her everything. About the mansion with rooms bigger than their entire apartment. About the garden with roses that smelled like heaven. About how Mr. Elon made them pancakes and taught them about the stars and listened to their bedtime prayers even though he said he didn't believe in God. "He's like a guardian angel, Mama," Sophie said, her eyes shining. "But he's sad about something. Sometimes I catch him looking at nothing, and his eyes get all distant and hurt." Emily looked at Elon, then really looked at him, and she saw what her daughter had seen. This man who had everything money could buy was missing something that money couldn't touch. This man who could send rockets to space was grounded by grief so deep it had roots in his soul. That night, as Elon sat in his study, reviewing medical reports and treatment plans, he heard something that made his blood run cold. Crying. Soft, heartbroken sobbing coming from the guest room where the twins slept. He found Claire curled up in a ball on the window seat, her small body shaking with fear that she had tried so hard to be brave about. Sophie slept peacefully in the bed they shared, unaware that her sister was drowning in worry. "Hey," Elon said softly, settling down beside her. "What's wrong? What if Mama doesn't get better?" Claire whispered, her voice so small it was almost lost in the vastness of the room. "What if she dies like Daddy did? What if Sophie and I have to go to the place where they put kids who don't have parents?" Elon's heart shattered. He pulled her onto his lap, this tiny girl who weighed nothing, but somehow felt like she carried the weight of the world. "Your mama is going to be fine," he said, his voice steady even though his hands were shaking. "I promise you, I won't let anything happen to her." "But what if you change your mind?" Claire asked, her tears soaking into his shirt. "What if you decide we're too much trouble?" "Never," Elon said, and the word came out with such fierce certainty that it surprised him. "I will never abandon you. Either of you. You're safe here. You're wanted here." Something shifted in that moment. Some invisible thread connected them, binding them together in ways that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with love. The kind of love that appears suddenly, unexpectedly, and refuses to be denied. The mansion began to change. The sterile perfection gave way to something warmer, more alive. Children's laughter echoed through halls that had known only silence. Toys appeared in corners where priceless art once stood alone. The kitchen, which had been a showpiece, became a place where homework was done and stories were shared and pancakes were shaped like dreams. Elon found himself canceling meetings, rearranging his schedule, making decisions based not on profit margins but on bedtime stories and whether Claire needed help with her reading. He arranged for tutors to come to the house, transforming one of the sitting rooms into a classroom where the twins could continue their education. But more than that, he became their teacher. He showed them how to write simple code, their small fingers flying across keyboards as they programmed their own digital dollhouses. He taught them to play the cello, their tiny hands struggling with the strings while he guided them with infinite patience. Emily, growing stronger each day, watched from the hospital as her daughters bloomed under this unexpected care. She saw the way Elon's face lit up when they ran to him with their latest discoveries. She saw the way he looked at them with a mixture of wonder and protection and something deeper that made her heart ache with understanding. But she also saw the shadow that followed him. The way his eyes would cloud over when he passed that locked room. The way he would sometimes stop mid-sentence, as if hearing voices that no one else could hear. The way he held her daughters just a little too tightly, as if he were afraid they might disappear. Late at night, when the mansion was quiet and the twins were asleep, Elon would stand outside that locked door. His hand would reach for the handle, then fall away. Behind that door lay memories too precious and too painful to disturb. Behind that door was Rachel, his daughter, frozen in time at the age of 5, her room exactly as she had left it before the accident that had torn his world apart. He was falling in love with this makeshift family, this second chance at happiness. But love, he had learned, was dangerous. Love could be taken away in an instant, leaving you with nothing but locked rooms and memories that cut like glass. The fear of losing them was becoming stronger than his fear of loving them. And that terrified him more than any rocket launch ever could. It started with a fever. Sophie, who had been a whirlwind of energy just hours before, woke up pale and burning hot, her small body trembling against the Egyptian cotton sheets that had become her temporary sanctuary. The sight of her vulnerability sent Elon into a panic that surprised even him. "Get Dr. Harrison here now," he barked into his phone, his voice sharp with an urgency that made his assistant's heart race. "I don't care if he's in surgery. I don't care if he's on vacation. Get him here." He hadn't felt this helpless since the night Rachel had been rushed to the hospital. That same crushing weight in his chest. That same desperate need to fix something that money and intelligence couldn't touch. He found himself pacing Sophie's bedside like a caged animal, checking her temperature every few minutes, his hands shaking as he smoothed her damp hair away from her forehead. "She's going to be okay," he whispered more to himself than to Claire, who sat curled up in the chair beside the bed, her eyes wide with worry. "She's going to be fine." But his voice cracked on the words, betraying the fear that clawed at his throat like a living thing. Emily, who had been discharged from the hospital just days before, watched from the doorway as this powerful man, this titan of industry, transformed into something achingly human. She saw the way his shoulders curved inward with protective instinct. She saw the way he spoke to Sophie in gentle murmurs, promising her ice cream and stories and anything her heart desired if she would just get better. "You love them," she said quietly when the doctor had finally left, pronouncing Sophie's illness nothing more than a common flu that would pass with rest and care. Elon froze. The words hung in the air between them, like a confession he wasn't ready to make. "They're good kids," he said carefully, his back still turned to her as he adjusted Sophie's blankets for the 100th time. "That's not what I said." Emily's voice was soft but insistent. "I said you love them, and they love you. Sophie talks about you like you hung the moon. Claire draws pictures of you in her notebook over and over again." The silence stretched between them, heavy with truth that neither of them knew how to handle. Finally, Elon turned to face her, and Emily saw something in his eyes that made her heart stop. Fear. Raw, desperate fear of losing something precious. "What happens when you're ready to leave?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What happens when you find a place of your own?" Emily's breath caught. She had been thinking about that very question, worrying about overstaying their welcome, about becoming a burden to this man who had already given them everything. "I've been looking at apartments," she admitted. "I don't want to take advantage of your kindness. What if I don't want you to leave?" The words escaped before he could stop them, hanging in the air like a bridge neither of them knew how to cross. That night, after Sophie's fever had broken and she was sleeping peacefully, Elon found himself standing outside that locked door again. But this time, his hand didn't hesitate. The key turned with a soft click that seemed to echo through his soul. The room was exactly as he had left it 5 years ago. Pink walls covered with drawings of unicorns and rainbows. A small bed with a canopy that looked like a fairy tale. Toys scattered across the floor as if Rachel had just stepped out to get a glass of water and would be back any moment. He didn't hear Claire approach until she was standing beside him, her small hand slipping into his. "She was beautiful," Claire whispered, looking at the framed photograph on the nightstand. Rachel at her 5th birthday party, chocolate cake smeared across her grinning face, her eyes sparkling with the same mischief that lived in Claire's own gaze. "She was everything," Elon said, his voice thick with tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed in years. "She was my whole world." "What happened?" The question was simple, but the answer felt like swallowing glass. "There was an accident," he said. "A drunk driver. My wife and Rachel were coming home from a piano lesson. They died instantly." Claire's hand tightened around his. "I'm sorry," she said with the wisdom of a child who understood loss in ways no child should. "I miss my daddy too. Sometimes I dream about him, and when I wake up, I forget he's gone. It hurts every time I remember." Something broke open in Elon's chest. For 5 years, he had carried his grief alone, had built walls around his heart so high that nothing could get in or out. But this 7-year-old girl, with her honest eyes and gentle heart, had found a crack in those walls. "Does it get easier?" he asked, and he was amazed to hear himself asking such a question of a child. "Not easier," Claire said thoughtfully, "but less lonely. When I'm sad about Daddy, Sophie hugs me, and it doesn't hurt as much. Maybe that's what friends are for." They stood there in the soft light of Rachel's room, two souls bound by loss and the fragile hope of healing. When Sophie appeared in the doorway, still pale but curious, and Emily followed close behind, Elon felt something shift inside him. The room that had been a mausoleum suddenly felt like a place where love could live again. "Tell us about her," Sophie said, settling cross-legged on the floor beside a dollhouse that was far more elaborate than the one the twins had tried to sell in the park. "Tell us about Rachel." And so he did. He told them about her laugh, which sounded like wind chimes in a summer breeze. About her obsession with dinosaurs and her dream of becoming a paleontologist. About the way she would sneak into his office during important video calls just to wave at the camera and make everyone smile. For the first time in 5 years, the memories didn't feel like knives. They felt like gifts. Emily watched from a doorway as this broken man slowly pieced himself back together in front of her daughters. She saw the way his face relaxed as he laughed at a story about Rachel's attempt to teach their dog to fly. She saw the way Claire and Sophie listened with rapt attention, their hearts big enough to hold his grief alongside their own. The house began to change again, but this time the transformation was deeper. The sterile perfection gave way to something warmer, more lived in. Children's artwork appeared on refrigerators. Toys migrated from bedrooms to living rooms. The silence that had ruled the mansion for years was replaced by the sound of a family learning to be a family. Elon found himself canceling fewer meetings, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He wanted to help with homework. He wanted to read bedtime stories. He wanted to be present for the small moments that he had missed with Rachel and refused to miss again. But even as happiness bloomed in the spaces between them, tension grew like a shadow. Emily, feeling stronger each day, had begun looking for work, for apartments, for a way to rebuild the independent life she had lost. She left job applications scattered across the kitchen table, like breadcrumbs leading away from the life they had built together. "I found a place," she said one evening, her voice careful and neutral. "It's small, but it's affordable. We could move in next week." Elon felt the world tilt beneath his feet. "You don't have to leave," he said quickly. "There's no rush. You're welcome to stay as long as you need." "But that's just it," Emily replied, her eyes filled with a sadness that matched his own. "I can't keep taking charity. I need to provide for my girls. I need to be their mother, not just someone you're helping." The words hit him like a physical blow. He understood her pride, her need for independence. But the thought of losing them, of watching them walk away from this life they had built together, was unbearable. That weekend, he took them to the Science Museum, desperate to create more memories before they slipped away. As they walked through the exhibits, other visitors began to notice them. A wealthy man with two young girls and a beautiful woman, all of them laughing and holding hands like they belonged together. "What a lovely family," an elderly woman commented, and Elon felt his heart stop. Family. The word felt both foreign and perfect on his tongue. But Emily stiffened beside him. "We're not," she said quietly. "We're just friends." The correction felt like a door slamming shut. Elon watched as Emily pulled back, as she reminded herself that this was temporary, that they were guests in his life, not permanent residents. That night, as he sat in his office staring at the city lights, Elon made a decision. He couldn't let them go. Not because he owned them, or because they owed him something, but because somewhere in the midst of broken hearts and healing souls, they had become his family. He began to plan, not just for their immediate future, but for a life together that would give Emily the independence she craved while keeping the people he loved close to his heart. It was ambitious, even by his standards. But then again, he had never been a man to accept the impossible. He was going to find a way to make them stay. Not as his charity cases, but as his family. And he was going to do it before they walked out of his life forever. Claire had always been the observer, the one who noticed things that others missed. She watched Elon with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul, and she could tell that something was different. He moved through the house like a man carrying a secret, checking his phone constantly, running his hands through his hair in a gesture that spoke of nervous energy barely contained. "You're scared," she said one morning, appearing at his elbow, while he stood at the kitchen window, lost in thought. Her voice held the matter-of-fact certainty that only children possess. Elon looked down at her, this 7-year-old who had become his unexpected confidant. "What makes you say that?" "You get that look," Claire explained, her small finger tracing patterns on the marble countertop. "Like when Sophie was sick. Like when you're afraid something good might go away." The accuracy of her observation hit him like a physical blow. "You're very wise for someone so young." Claire smiled, but it was a sad smile, one that belonged on a face much older than hers. "Mama loves you, you know. She thinks we don't notice, but Sophie and I see the way she looks at you. Like you're the answer to prayers she never thought would be answered. And how do you feel about that?" Elon asked, his voice carefully controlled. "I think," Claire said slowly, "that maybe we could all stop being so afraid of being happy." Her words echoed in his mind as he finalized his plans. Lake Tahoe. A place where the water was so clear it looked like liquid sapphire, where the mountains rose up like ancient guardians protecting secrets and dreams. He had rented a small cabin, nothing ostentatious, just a place where they could be a family without the weight of his wealth defining every moment. The drive was filled with the twins' excitement as they pressed their faces against the windows, marveling at the changing landscape. Emily sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, and he could feel the steady rhythm of her breathing, the way her body relaxed as the city fell away behind them. "It's been so long since we've been anywhere together," she said softly, her voice filled with wonder. "Just the four of us." Four, the number that had become his new definition of wholeness. They spent the morning by the lake, the twins building elaborate sandcastles while Emily and Elon sat on a blanket, watching their daughters play. The sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber, and the sound of the twins' laughter mixed with the gentle lapping of waves against the shore created a symphony that spoke of peace, of possibility, of home. "Walk with me," Elon asked when the twins had become absorbed in their creation, their small hands working together to build towers that reached toward the sky. They walked along the water's edge, their feet leaving temporary impressions in the sand that the lake would soon erase. Emily's hand found his, their fingers intertwining with the natural ease of two people who had learned to trust each other with their broken pieces. "I need to tell you something," Elon said, his voice carrying across the water like a prayer. "These past months, having you and the girls in my life, it's changed everything. You've brought light back into corners of my heart that I thought would stay dark forever." Emily stopped walking, turning to face him. The afternoon sun created a halo around her hair, and her eyes reflected the lake's deep blue. "Elon, I know this is complicated," he continued, the words tumbling out like water breaking through a dam. "I know you didn't ask for any of this. You were just trying to save your daughter's life, and I was just trying to fill the emptiness in mine. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that." He reached into his pocket, his fingers closing around the small velvet box that had belonged to his grandmother. The ring inside was simple, elegant, a single diamond that caught the light like a captured star. It wasn't about the money or the status. It was about legacy, about love passed down through generations. "I'm terrified," he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm terrified of loving you and losing you. I'm terrified of being happy again because happiness feels like a betrayal of everything I lost. But I'm more terrified of letting you walk away without telling you that you and Sophie and Claire have become my everything." Emily's eyes filled with tears that caught the sunlight like liquid diamonds. "Elon, I know I can't replace what you lost," he said, dropping to one knee in the sand, the box trembling in his hands. "I know I can't be the father they remember, but I can love them like they're my own. I can love you like you're the miracle I never thought I deserved." He opened the box, the ring catching the light and throwing rainbows across the water. "Emily, will you marry me? Will you let me be the father Sophie and Claire need? Will you let me be the man you deserve?" The world seemed to hold its breath. The lake went still. Even the wind paused, as if nature itself was waiting for her answer. Emily looked at him, this man who had saved her life in ways that went far beyond paying for doctors and hospitals. This man who had learned to love again despite the scars on his heart. This man who had shown her daughters what it meant to be cherished, protected, adored. "Yes," she whispered, the word so soft it was almost lost in the vastness of the lake. "Yes, Elon. Yes to all of it." He slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook with joy and relief, and the overwhelming weight of second chances. When he stood, she was already in his arms, and they kissed with the desperation of two people who had found each other against impossible odds. "Mama, Mr. Elon." Sophie's voice carried across the beach, filled with excitement and curiosity. "What are you doing?" The twins came running, their castle forgotten, their eyes wide as they took in the scene before them. Emily held out her hand, the ring catching the light like a promise made manifest. "We're getting married," Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. Elon asked me to marry him. Claire's eyes went wide. Does that mean he'll be our daddy? The question hung in the air like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Elon knelt down, bringing himself to their level, his eyes serious but warm. Only if you want me to be, he said. I know I can't replace your father. I would never try to, but I love you both so much, and I would be honored to be your dad. Sophie threw herself into his arms with the abandon of a child who had found her safe harbor. Claire followed, more hesitant but no less sincere, her arms wrapping around his neck as she whispered, I'd like that. I'd like that very much. They stood there by the lake for souls who had found each other in most unexpected way, holding each other as if they could stop time itself. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and for the first time in years, Elon felt truly at peace. That night, as they sat on the cabin's porch watching the stars emerge one by one, Elon held the twins' dollhouse in his hands. The same dollhouse they had tried to sell that day in the park, the dollhouse that had started this entire journey. Do you think she would have liked them? Emily asked softly, knowing instinctively that he was thinking about Rachel. She would have loved them, Elon said, his voice certain. She would have loved you too. She always said that families aren't just about blood, they're about love. And there's so much love here. When the news broke, as it inevitably would in a world where privacy was a luxury even billionaires couldn't always afford, the reaction was swift and intense. The headlines screamed about the tech mogul's surprising engagement to a single mother, about the fairy tale romance that had bloomed from tragedy. But Elon didn't care about the headlines. He cared about the woman who stood beside him at the charity gala, radiant in a simple blue dress, her hand steady in his as they faced the cameras and the questions and the judgment of a world that would never truly understand their story. Are you happy? A reporter asked, the question cutting through the noise and chaos of the crowd. Elon looked at Emily, then at the twins who were being entertained by his assistant in a quiet corner of the ballroom. He thought about the journey that had brought them here, about the pain and the healing and the courage it had taken to love again. Yes, he said, his voice carrying across the room with the weight of absolute truth. For the first time in 5 years, I can honestly say I'm happy. They danced that night, swaying to music that seemed to exist just for them, oblivious to the cameras and the whispers and the speculation. In that moment, they were just a man and a woman who had found each other in the ruins of their separate sorrows and built something beautiful together. The dollhouse sat on the mantle of their home, no longer for sale, no longer a symbol of desperation. Now it was a reminder of how love could appear in most unexpected places, how second chances could come disguised as two little girls with a toy and a dream of saving their mother. And in the locked room that was no longer locked, Rachel's picture smiled down at them all, as if she were giving her blessing to this new chapter, this new family, this new beginning that had grown from the ashes of goodbye. The house felt different when they returned from the lake. Not just because of the ring that caught the light on Emily's finger, or the way the twins practically bounced through the hallways with excitement. It was something deeper, more fundamental. The walls themselves seemed to exhale, as if the mansion had been holding its breath for years and could finally breathe again. Daddy Elon, Daddy Elon. Sophie's voice rang through the marble foyer, the new title rolling off her tongue with the natural ease of a child who had found her place in the world. Wait until you see what we made in art class. Claire appeared beside her sister, clutching a construction paper card that had been decorated with glitter and stickers and all the concentrated love that 7-year-old hands could pour into a creation. It's for you, she said, suddenly shy now that the moment had arrived. For being the best daddy we could ask for. Elon knelt down, his throat tight with emotion as he accepted the card. Inside, in careful crayon letters, they had written, "Thank you for choosing us." The words hit him like a physical blow, beautiful and devastating in their simplicity. "Thank you for letting me choose you," he whispered back, pulling them both into his arms. Emily watched from the doorway, her heart so full it felt like it might burst from the sheer weight of happiness. The transformation of Rachel's room became a family project, a delicate dance between honoring the past and embracing the future. They didn't pack away her belongings or pretend she had never existed. Instead, they created a space where memory and hope could coexist, where the little girl who had been lost could somehow be part of the family that was being found. She would have loved having big sisters, Elon said one afternoon as they arranged fresh flowers beneath Rachel's portrait. The twins had insisted on including her in everything, talking to her picture like she was simply in another room, temporarily out of sight, but never out of mind. "I think she sent us to you," Claire said with the matter-of-fact certainty that only children possess. "I think she knew you needed us as much as we needed you." The wedding planning began in earnest, though planning seemed too formal a word for what was really happening. Emily and Elon would sit at the kitchen table after the twins had gone to bed, surrounded by catalogs and flower samples and menu options, but somehow the conversation always drifted away from logistics and toward dreams. "I don't care about the dress or the flowers or the food," Elon said one evening, his hand covering hers across the table. "I just want to stand up in front of the people we love and promise to be your husband, their father, for the rest of my life." Emily smiled, that radiant smile that had become his favorite sight in the world. "We're already a family," she said softly. "The ceremony is just making it official." And she was right. They had become a family in the quiet moments, in the shared breakfasts and bedtime stories, in the way they naturally divided up responsibilities and worried about each other's happiness. The wedding would be a celebration, not a transformation. The day dawned clear and bright, the kind of California morning that felt like a blessing from the universe itself. The garden behind the mansion had been transformed into something magical, with white roses climbing the arbors and fairy lights strung between the trees like captured stars. Sophie and Claire walked down the aisle first, their matching pale pink dresses rustling like whispered promises. They carried baskets of rose petals that they scattered with the serious concentration of children who understood the importance of their role. When they reached the altar, they took their places as honorary bridesmaids, their faces glowing with pride and joy. Then Emily appeared, and the world seemed to pause. She wore a simple dress of ivory silk that caught the morning light like liquid moonbeams. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, with a few loose tendrils framing her face. She carried a bouquet of white roses and baby's breath, but it was her smile that truly took everyone's breath away. Elon felt his knees go weak as she walked toward him. This woman who had saved his life without even knowing it. This woman who had taught him that love wasn't a weakness to be conquered, but strength to be embraced. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, and the world narrowed to just the two of them and the promises they were about to make. "Emily," he began, his voice steady despite the tears that threatened to fall. "I thought I was broken beyond repair. I thought the best parts of me had died with Rachel and Sarah. But you showed me that hearts can heal, that love can bloom again even in the darkest soil. You and Sophie and Claire didn't just save my life. You gave me back my soul." Emily's voice was thick with emotion as she spoke her vows. "Elon, you think you saved us, but you're wrong. We saved each other. You taught my daughters that they are worthy of love, that they deserve to be protected and cherished. You taught me that accepting help isn't weakness, it's courage. We weren't charity cases in your life. We were the family you were always meant to have." The rings they exchanged were simple bands of platinum, engraved with the words "second chances" in elegant script. As they slipped them onto each other's fingers, the small gathering of friends and family wiped away tears and whispered prayers of gratitude for the miracle they were witnessing. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant said, and when Elon and Emily kissed, the twins cheered and the guests applauded, and somewhere in the distance, it seemed like the whole world was celebrating the power of love to heal, to transform, to make all things new. The reception was everything a wedding should be. Laughter and tears and dancing and joy. Elon danced with his new wife, then with each of his daughters, lifting them onto his feet so they could sway to the music together. Emily watched with eyes that sparkled with happiness, marveling at how naturally he had slipped into the role of father, how completely he had embraced the chaos and beauty of family life. As the evening wound down and the guests began to leave, Elon found himself standing in the garden where they had exchanged vows, holding the twins' hands as they looked up at the stars. "Are you happy, Daddy?" Sophie asked, her voice drowsy with contentment. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he replied, and meant it with every fiber of his being. The months that followed were a masterclass in the beautiful ordinariness of family life. The mansion, once a monument to solitude and success, became a home in the truest sense. Children's artwork covered the refrigerator. Toys migrated from room to room. The sound of laughter echoed through hallways that had known only silence for too long. Elon discovered that he was a natural at the mundane magic of parenthood. He became an expert at French braids and bedtime stories. He learned to navigate the complex social dynamics of second-grade friendships and the delicate art of packing nutritious lunches that would actually be eaten. Emily returned to work, finding a position at a local nonprofit that allowed her to help other families in crisis. She would come home with stories of hope and healing, of second chances and new beginnings. Elon would listen with the attention of a man who understood that her work wasn't just a job, but a calling. The past wasn't forgotten. Rachel's memory lived on in the stories they told and the traditions they kept. On her birthday, they would release balloons into the sky and share their favorite memories. On the anniversary of the accident, they would visit her grave together, the twins leaving flowers and drawings and whispered promises to take care of their daddy. But the past no longer defined them. It was part of their story, but it wasn't the end of their story. They had learned to carry their losses with grace while embracing their gains with gratitude. "I used to think that happiness was selfish," Elon said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the twins chase fireflies in the garden. "I thought that moving on meant forgetting, that healing meant betrayal." Emily took his hand, her thumb tracing the wedding ring that had become as natural as breathing. "And now I know that love isn't finite. It doesn't run out. It multiplies. The love I had for Rachel didn't disappear when I learned to love you and the girls. It grew. It became part of something bigger and more beautiful than I ever imagined possible." The fireflies danced in the gathering dusk, and somewhere in the house, a child's laughter rang out like a bell. Elon closed his eyes and listened to the sound of his life, no longer empty but full, no longer silent, but singing with the music of family. He had learned that strength wasn't about building walls around your heart. It was about tearing them down and letting love flood in, messy and chaotic and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. He had learned that second chances weren't just about getting what you'd lost back. They were about discovering what you never knew you needed. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Elon Musk, the man who had conquered space and revolutionized the world, finally understood that his greatest achievement wasn't launching rockets or building empires. It was this, a home filled with love, a family built on faith, and the courage to believe that even broken hearts could learn to soar again. Life has a way of settling into patterns, doesn't it? Like water finding its level. Their days began to flow around the gentle rhythms of school runs and doctor visits, of work calls and bedtime stories. Emily would wake each morning to the sound of small feet padding across hardwood floors, Sophie's sleepy voice calling for water, Claire already dressed and brushing her teeth with the determined precision of a 7-year-old who'd learned to be responsible too young. But beneath this carefully constructed normalcy, something was shifting. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, its subject line glowing on Emily's laptop screen like a beacon of possibility. A web design company, one she'd admired from afar, was offering her a position. Remote work, flexible hours, good pay. Everything she dreamed of during those long, uncertain nights when the bills seemed to multiply like shadows. Her finger hovered over the mouse, trembling slightly. This was what she'd wanted, wasn't it? Independence, security, the ability to stand on her own 2 feet again. So why did her heart feel like it was breaking? She found herself staring at the offer letter for hours, the words blurring together as doubt crept in like fog. Elon was in his study, the the soft click of his keyboard a familiar soundtrack to her uncertainty. They'd been dancing around this conversation for weeks now, speaking in careful half-sentences about the future, about what came next, neither willing to name the fear that lived between them. That evening, as Emily tucked Sophie into bed, she noticed the way her youngest daughter's eyes searched her face. Children see everything, don't they? They feel the tension in the air, like barometric pressure before a storm. "Mommy looks sad," Sophie whispered, her small hand reaching up to touch Emily's cheek. "I'm just tired, sweetheart." But Sophie wasn't convinced. None of them were. The next morning, Emily found Claire and Sophie huddled together in the kitchen, their voices low and serious. When they saw her, they scattered like startled birds. It was Elon who finally addressed the elephant in the room. He found the girls in the living room that afternoon, their homework spread across the coffee table like a colorful mosaic. Claire looked up as he entered, her expression surprisingly grave for someone so young. "Are you and Mommy fighting?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elon's heart clenched. He settled onto the couch beside them, choosing his words carefully. "We're not fighting, sweetheart. Sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions, and that can feel scary." "What kind of decisions?" Sophie crawled into his lap, her small body fitting perfectly against his chest. "Well," he paused, running his fingers through her dark hair. "Sometimes we have to decide what's best for the people we love, even when we're not sure what that is." Claire studied his face with eyes too old for her years. "Are you scared too?" The question hit him like a physical blow. How do you explain to a child that yes, you're terrified, that you found something precious and fragile, and you're desperately afraid of breaking it? That you wake up each morning grateful for their laughter echoing through your house, and go to sleep each night wondering if tomorrow will be the day they leave? "Yes," he said simply. "I'm scared too." Meanwhile, Emily sat in the kitchen, staring at her laptop screen, paralyzed by the weight of her own fears. She'd been dependent before on her ex-husband, on his promises, on his version of their future. She'd sworn she'd never put herself in that position again. But here she was, hesitating over a job offer because accepting it felt like admitting she didn't need Elon anymore. And the truth was, she did need him. Not just for the roof over their heads or the security he provided, but for the way he made Sophie laugh, the way he helped Claire with her math homework, the way he looked at Emily herself like she was something worth treasuring. Was that weakness? Or was it something else entirely? The answer came, as answers often do, in the middle of the night. Sophie's fever spiked suddenly, her small body burning against Emily's chest as she carried her to the bathroom. But it was Elon who appeared in the doorway, his hair disheveled, his eyes immediately alert. "How high?" he asked, already reaching for the thermometer. They worked together in the blue glow of the nightlight, cool washcloths and children's Tylenol, taking turns holding Sophie as she whimpered and clung to them. Emily watched Elon's face as he cradled her daughter, saw the way his jaw tightened with worry, the gentle way he murmured reassurances into Sophie's damp hair. This wasn't duty. This was an obligation. This was love, pure and simple. When Sophie's fever finally broke near dawn, Emily found herself curled up in the chair beside the bed, watching Elon sleep with Sophie sprawled across his chest. His arm was wrapped protectively around her small form, and even in sleep, his brow was creased with concern. He'd become their anchor without either of them realizing it. The conversation came a few days later when Sophie was recovered and playing in the backyard with Claire. Emily found Elon in the kitchen, making coffee with the methodical precision of someone who needed the routine to think clearly. "I got a job offer," she said without preamble. His hand stilled on the coffee maker. "That's wonderful." His voice was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "I don't want to take it." He turned to face her, hope and confusion warring in his expression. "Emily, I know how that sounds. I know what it looks like. But I need you to understand something." She took a breath, steadying herself. "I'm not staying because I need to. I'm staying because I want to. Because this, what we have here, it's not dependence. It's choice. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the girls chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, Claire appeared at Elon's side. She'd been quiet all day, processing in the way children do. "I miss my daddy," she said suddenly. Elon's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Tell me about him." And so she did. She told him about Saturday morning pancakes and piggyback rides, about the way her father would read her stories with different voices for each character. As she spoke, Elon found himself sharing his own memories of Rachel, about the way she'd sing while cooking dinner, about her terrible jokes that always made him laugh anyway. They sat there in the fading light, 3 generations of loss and love, weaving their stories together like a tapestry. Emily listened from a kitchen window, tears streaming down her face as she realized what was happening. They weren't replacing what they'd lost. They were creating something new from the pieces of their broken hearts. "Daddy Elon," Sophie called from the yard, the words so natural they might have been saying them forever. "Come catch fireflies with us." Elon froze, his eyes wide. Emily watched as panic and joy crashed together in his expression. He looked at her through the window, questioning, afraid to hope. She nodded, smiling through her tears. And for the first time in months, Elon allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. That night, after the girls were asleep, Emily found him sitting on the edge of their bed, staring at his hands. "What if I fail them?" he whispered. "What if I'm not enough?" She sat beside him, taking his hands in hers. "Do you love them?" "More than I thought possible." "Then you're enough. Love is enough." But even as she said the words, Emily could see the fear in his eyes. The terror of loving again, of opening his heart to the possibility of loss. She understood it completely. They were all walking on a tightrope, balancing hope and fear, love and the memory of pain. "I'm scared too," she admitted. "We're all scared, but we're scared together. And that makes all the difference." Outside, the fireflies continued their ancient dance, tiny lights blinking in the darkness like stars fallen to earth. Inside, a family was being born from the ashes of 2 others, fragile and precious, and absolutely worth the risk. Some moments in life arrive with the weight of destiny, don't they? You can feel them approaching like the change in air pressure before a storm, electric and inevitable. For Emily, that moment began with the way Elon's eyes sparkled with barely contained secrets, the way he kept glancing at his watch during dinner, the way Claire and Sophie exchanged knowing looks across the table, like tiny conspirators. "What are you 3 plotting?" she asked, though her heart was already beginning to race with anticipation. "Nothing," Sophie said, her voice pitched high with excitement. Claire elbowed her sister, shooting her a look that clearly said, "Keep the secret." But Emily knew. Deep in her bones, she knew. The lake house had been Elon's idea, a weekend retreat he'd suggested with studied casualness. "The girls need some fresh air," he'd said, though Emily noticed the way his fingers drummed against his coffee mug, the way he kept checking his phone for messages. Now, as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the water in shades of gold and amber, she watched him through the kitchen window as he set up something by the water's edge. Candles. He was lighting candles. Her breath caught in her throat. After everything they'd been through, after all the careful steps and tentative touches, after the gradual weaving of their lives together, like threads in a tapestry, this moment felt both surprising and inevitable. "Mommy, you have to put on the pretty dress," Claire announced, appearing at her side with the determination of a general marshalling troops. "What pretty dress?" "The blue one. Daddy Elon said it makes your eyes look like the ocean." Daddy Elon. The name still sent warmth spreading through Emily's chest every time she heard it. She let the girls lead her upstairs, let them brush her hair, and debate the merits of lipstick versus lip gloss, their chatter filling the air like birdsong. They were so happy, so full of joy and anticipation, that Emily found herself caught up in their excitement despite her nerves. When they finally led her down to the lake, the sun was just touching the water, turning the entire world into something magical. Elon stood waiting by the shore, handsome in his navy jacket, his usually perfectly styled hair slightly mussed by the evening breeze. Behind him, a small table held 2 wine glasses and what looked like a picnic basket. The candles flickered in the gathering dusk, their light dancing across the water like fallen stars. "Emily," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. She walked toward him slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Claire and Sophie flanked her like tiny bridesmaids, their faces glowing with excitement and secrets finally ready to be revealed. "I need to tell you something," Elon began, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for hers. "For the longest time, I thought my story was over. I thought I'd had my one chance at happiness, and when I lost it, I convinced myself that was enough. That I should be grateful for the time I'd had, and learn to live with the emptiness." His thumb traced circles on her palm, a gesture so familiar now, so comforting. "But you changed everything. You and these beautiful girls, you didn't just bring light back into my life. You brought hope. You brought the possibility of new beginnings, of second chances I never thought I deserved." Emily's vision blurred with tears. Behind Elon, the lake stretched endlessly, reflecting the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "I love you," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "I love the way you hum while you're cooking, the way you worry about everyone except yourself, the way you've taught me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. I love watching you with the girls, seeing the fierce protectiveness in your eyes, the gentleness in your touch." He dropped to one knee then, and Emily's world tilted. This was really happening. After all the heartbreak, all the uncertainty, all the careful rebuilding of trust and hope, this moment had arrived like a gift she'd been afraid to want. The ring box appeared in his hands, navy velvet worn smooth with handling. "Emily Margaret Harrison, will you marry me? Will you let me be the father these girls deserve? Will you give us all the chance to build something beautiful together?" The ring was perfect. Not too large, not too flashy, but elegant and timeless, catching the candlelight like captured starfire. Emily stared at it through her tears, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. Not just marriage, but partnership. Not just love, but family. Not just a future, but a healing of all the broken places in their hearts. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, yes, yes." The cheer that erupted from Claire and Sophie could probably be heard across the lake. They launched themselves at both adults, creating a tangle of arms and legs and joyful tears. Emily felt the cool metal of the ring sliding onto her finger, felt Elon's arms around her, felt the girls' warm bodies pressed against them both. "Are we going to have a party?" Sophie demanded, bouncing on her toes. "The biggest party ever," Claire added hopefully. Elon laughed, the sound rich and warm in the evening air. "What do you think, Emily? Big party or small celebration?" Emily looked around at the 3 faces watching her expectantly, these people who had become her everything, and felt a peace settle over her like a warm blanket. "Small," she said. "Just us and the people who matter most." And so the planning began. The house, which had been quiet and orderly for so long, suddenly buzzed with activity and excitement. Wedding magazines appeared on every surface. Fabric swatches were debated with the seriousness of international diplomacy, and the girls appointed themselves official wedding coordinators with the enthusiasm of tiny dictators. "You can't wear that," Claire informed Elon one morning, gesturing dismissively at his usual black suit. "This is a wedding, not a funeral." "Fashion police," Sophie added solemnly, having learned the term from some movie and wielding it with great authority. Emily watched from the kitchen as Elon submitted to their critique with good grace, letting them lead him through his closet like he was their personal dress-up doll. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions now deferred to the judgment of a 5-year-old and her 7-year-old sister. The transformation was remarkable. His colleagues noticed too. Phone calls that once would have demanded his immediate attention were politely redirected. Weekend work sessions became things of the past. Emily would find him in his study, laptop closed, playing tea party with Sophie or helping Claire with her homework. "I have a family now," he told his assistant when she questioned the change in his schedule. They come first. The rings arrived on a Tuesday, nestled in a box like sleeping promises. Emily turned hers over in her palm, reading the inscription Elon had chosen, second chances in elegant script. It was perfect, she thought. A reminder that love doesn't always come when you expect it, but when you need it most. What about Rachel? Emily asked one evening as they sat surrounded by wedding planning debris. She should be part of this somehow. Elon's eyes filled with grateful tears. I hoped you'd say that. They found ways to include her memory in their celebration. A candle on the altar, a photo tucked into Emily's bouquet, a moment of silence for those who couldn't be there, but whose love had shaped them all. It felt right, Emily thought. Complete. Mrs. Portman watched it all unfold with the satisfaction of someone who had seen this coming long before anyone else. About time, she muttered, but her eyes were soft with happiness as she watched the girls help Emily choose flowers. The house itself seemed to pulse with new energy. Where once there had been careful politeness, now there was comfortable chaos. Breakfast conversations that ran long and made them all late. Homework sessions that devolved into tickle fights. Bedtime stories that stretched into the night because no one wanted the day to end. This was what happiness looked like, Emily realized. Not the perfect pose moments from magazines, but the messy, loud, overwhelming, beautiful reality of a family learning to love without reservation. Standing in the kitchen one morning, watching Elon help Sophie tie her shoes while Claire practiced her spelling words aloud, Emily felt a gratitude so profound it took her breath away. They had all been broken in different ways, all carried scars that would never fully heal. But somehow, together, they had created something whole, something worth celebrating, something worth believing in. Some rooms hold more than furniture, don't they? They hold the echoes of laughter, the whispers of dreams, the tender weight of a love that transcends time itself. Rachel's room had been frozen in amber for 3 years, a shrine to what was lost, untouched and untouchable. But now, standing in the doorway with Emily's hand warm in his, Elon felt something shift in the sacred space. We don't have to change anything, Emily said softly, her voice carrying the careful reverence of someone who understood the delicate balance between honoring the past and embracing the future. But Elon shook his head, his eyes moving across the pale yellow walls, the reading chair by the window where Rachel used to curl up with her books, the vanity still holding her favorite perfume bottle. No, he said, his voice steady with newfound certainty. She wouldn't want this to be a museum. She'd want it to be alive again. And so they began the tender process of integration. Not erasing, never erasing, but weaving Rachel's memory into the fabric of their growing family. They moved some of her books to the living room shelves, where the girls could discover them naturally. Her jewelry box found a new home on Emily's dresser, its delicate music box ballerina still dancing to the same haunting melody. The conversation with Claire and Sophie came naturally, as these conversations do, over afternoon cookies and milk. Children, Emily had learned, have an incredible capacity for understanding when you speak to them with honesty wrapped in love. Sometimes people we love have to go away, Elon explained, his voice gentle but sure. But the love they gave us doesn't go away. It stays here. He touched his chest, right over his heart. Sophie, crumbs dotting her chin, considered this with the seriousness of someone much older. Like when Daddy went to heaven. Exactly like that. It was Claire who asked the question that had been weighing on all their hearts. Do you think she likes us? Rachel, I mean, do you think she's happy about our family? Elon felt his throat tighten with emotion. He looked at these two precious girls who had brought such light into his darkness, who had taught him that love multiplies rather than divides, that healing doesn't mean forgetting. I know she does, he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. I think she's been waiting for us to find each other. The wedding preparations continued with a lightness that surprised them all. Where Emily had expected stress and complexity, she found joy and anticipation. The girls insisted on tasting every flavor of cake, conducting their deliberations with the gravity of food critics. Elon, who had once made decisions affecting millions without batting an eye, now spent hours debating the merits of peonies versus roses with the patience of a saint. Emily's new job brought its own rhythm to their days. She worked from home mostly, the soft clicking of her keyboard becoming another layer in the symphony of their domestic life. But it was more than just work. It was independence reclaimed, creativity unleashed, the gradual rebuilding of her professional identity alongside her personal one. The afternoons had become Elon's domain. Where once he would have been in his office until well past dinner, now he could be found at the school gate, waiting with the other parents, his expensive suits replaced by comfortable jeans and sweaters. He learned the names of the other mothers, discovered the intricate social hierarchies of elementary school politics, found unexpected pleasure in the simple ritual of picking up his girls. Your girls. The phrase still sent warmth spreading through his chest every time he thought it. Their relationship as a couple was evolving too, finding its own natural rhythm. They learned to navigate the small disagreements that come with blending lives, discovered that love isn't always harmony, but sometimes the willingness to work through discord together. Emily's tendency to worry about everything clashed occasionally with Elon's need to fix everything, but they were learning to meet in the middle, to communicate with the patience that comes from knowing you're in this for the long haul. Saturday mornings had become sacred. This particular Saturday found them all in the backyard, constructing an elaborate habitat for a turtle Sophie had discovered by the lake. What had started as a simple project had evolved into something that would make an engineer proud, complete with a miniature pond, carefully arranged rocks, and a small shelter crafted from twigs and leaves. "It needs a name," Claire declared, watching their new pet explore its new home with the measured pace of someone conducting a thorough inspection. "How about Franklin?" Elon suggested, earning giggles from both girls. "That's a person name," Sophie protested. "Turtles can have people names," Emily said, settling beside them on the grass. "Franklin sounds perfect." Watching Elon patiently adjust the positioning of rocks for the third time, Emily felt a smile tug at her lips. This man, who had once commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions, was now utterly absorbed in creating the perfect environment for a turtle. The transformation was remarkable, and she wasn't the only one who had noticed. At the grocery store, old acquaintances stopped them to chat, their eyes bright with curiosity about the change in a man they'd known as distant and unreachable. "You look happy," Mrs. Chun from the bank had said, and Emily had seen the truth of it in Elon's face. The tight lines around his eyes had softened, the perpetual tension in his shoulders had eased, and he smiled now with an openness that was breathtaking. "I feel alive," he told Emily that night as they cleaned up the dinner dishes together. "For the first time in years, I actually feel alive." She understood exactly what he meant. The woman who had once felt invisible, who had doubted her worth and her strength, was flowering again. She caught glimpses of herself in mirrors and was startled by the brightness in her eyes, the confidence in her posture. Love, she realized, wasn't just about what you gave to someone else. It was about what their love allowed you to become. Their simple Tuesday night dinner had turned into something magical, as these moments often do. The girls had set the table with Emily's good china, declaring a fancy dinner for no reason other than the pure joy of making something ordinary feel special. Elon had opened a bottle of wine, and they'd all toasted to Franklin's successful relocation to his new home. "When you and Daddy Elon get married," Sophie announced, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth, "will you have a first dance?" Emily felt her cheeks warm. "I suppose we will." "I don't really know how to dance," Elon admitted, his own cheeks flushing slightly. "That's okay," Claire said with the confidence of someone who had clearly given this considerable thought. "We can all learn together." "I promise," Elon said, reaching across the table to take Emily's hand. "I'll teach you both to dance. We'll practice right here in the living room." And so they did. That very night, with the dishes forgotten and the coffee growing cold, they pushed back the furniture and turned on the radio. Elon spun the girls around the makeshift dance floor, their giggles filling the air like music. Emily watched from the doorway, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was what she had dreamed of in her darkest moments. Not the grand gestures or the fairy tale endings, but this. The simple, profound joy of being known and loved and cherished. Of belonging somewhere so completely that you couldn't imagine being anywhere else. The town was beginning to see them as a family unit now. At the coffee shop, the barista automatically prepared Emily's usual order alongside Elon's. At the bookstore, Mrs. Patterson had started recommending books for the girls without being asked. They were becoming part of the fabric of the community, woven into the daily life of the place they all called home. Old colleagues barely recognized the man Elon had become. The edge of ruthless efficiency had been replaced by something softer, more human. He still made smart decisions, still commanded respect, but now he also made time for turtle habitats and school plays and bedtime stories that went on far too long because nobody wanted them to end. They were all transforming, Emily realized. Not just healing from what had been lost, but growing into something new and beautiful. A family born not from blood but from choice, from the daily decision to love and be loved in return. Standing in their living room, watching Elon attempt to teach Sophie a waltz while Claire provided musical accompaniment on her toy piano, Emily felt a gratitude so profound it took her breath away. They had all been broken in different ways, all carried scars that would never fully fade. But somehow, together, they had created something whole, something worth celebrating, something worth believing in. And in the quiet moments between the laughter and the music, Emily could swear she felt Rachel's presence, gentle and approving, blessing the love that had grown from the ashes of sorrow. There's something magical about a garden wedding at golden hour, isn't there? When the light filters through the leaves like liquid honey and the air carries the scent of roses and promise. The mansion's garden had been transformed into something from a fairy tale, but not the grand, overwhelming kind. This was intimate, tender, perfect in its simplicity. White chairs arranged in gentle rows on the emerald lawn. Garlands of baby's breath and ivy wound around the old oak tree where they would exchange vows. Soft music drifting from hidden speakers, mingling with the distant sound of water from the fountain. Everything Emily had dreamed of, everything she'd been afraid to hope for. The guest list was small by design. Mrs. Portman, of course, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief she'd tucked into her sleeve. A few of Elon's closest colleagues, their faces bright with genuine happiness for the man they'd watched transform before their eyes. Emily's sister had flown in from Seattle, her presence a bridge between Emily's past and her radiant future. But it was the two small figures at the end of the aisle that made Emily's breath catch in her throat. Sophie and Claire, resplendent in their pale pink dresses, standing with the solemn dignity of princesses about to fulfill a sacred duty. In their small hands, they held silk cushions bearing the rings that would bind this family together in ways deeper than law or ceremony. "You look beautiful, Mommy," Claire whispered as Emily took her place at the garden's edge, her hand trembling slightly as she adjusted her simple white dress. It wasn't a traditional wedding gown, but something softer, more like her. Flowing fabric that caught the evening breeze, delicate lace at the sleeves, a dress that spoke of new beginnings rather than fairy tale endings. The music changed, signaling the moment they'd all been waiting for. Emily began her walk down the petal-strewn path, her eyes locked on Elon's face. He stood beneath the oak tree in his navy suit, the one Claire had finally approved of, and the expression on his face was one she would remember for the rest of her life. Wonder, gratitude, love so profound it seemed to light him from within. With each step, Emily felt the weight of the journey that had brought them here. The fear, the uncertainty, the gradual building of trust. The nights spent wondering if she was making the right choice, the mornings when she'd wake up grateful for the sound of his voice downstairs with the girls. All of it had led to this moment, this garden, this man who looked at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd never dared to speak. When she reached him, Elon's hands were trembling as he took hers. "You're here," he whispered, as if he still couldn't quite believe it. "I'm here," she whispered back. The officiant, a kind-faced woman they'd chosen for her warmth rather than her credentials, began the ceremony with words about love and commitment, about the blending of families and the courage it takes to begin again. But Emily barely heard her. She was lost in Elon's eyes, in the way the late afternoon light caught the silver at his temples, in the profound peace that settled over her like a blessing. When it came time for vows, Emily's voice was steady despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. Elon, when I met you, I was drowning. Not just financially, but in every way that mattered. You didn't just offer me a job or a roof over our heads. You offered me hope. You showed me that love isn't something that happens to you once and then disappears forever. It's something that can bloom again, stronger and more beautiful than before. She paused, glancing at Sophie and Claire, who were watching with the rapt attention of children witnessing something sacred. You didn't just save my life. You saved our hearts. You taught us that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about choice, about the daily decision to love and be loved in return. Elon's voice broke slightly when he began his vows. Emily, 3 years ago, I thought my story was over. I thought I'd had my chance at happiness and lost it forever. But you and these incredible girls showed me that some stories don't end. They just begin new chapters. He looked at Claire and Sophie, including them in his promise. You taught me that love doesn't run out. It multiplies. It grows. It transforms everything it touches. Emily, you brought light back into my darkness. You brought laughter back into my house. You brought me back to life. The rings were perfect, gleaming in the golden light as they slipped them onto each other's fingers. Second chances, the inscription that had become their motto, their reminder that love is worth the risk, always worth the risk. The kiss that sealed their union was soft, tender, full of promise. Around them, their small gathering erupted in applause, but Emily barely heard it. She was caught up in the moment, in the feeling of Elon's arms around her, in the sound of Sophie and Claire cheering in the background. The reception was held on the terrace, strung with fairy lights that twinkled like earthbound stars. The dinner was simple but elegant, each dish chosen for meaning rather than impression. Comfort food elevated to celebration, flavors that spoke of home and belonging. It was Sophie who provided the evening's most memorable moment. Standing on her chair, her face serious with concentration, she tapped her plastic cup with her fork until the conversation died down. I want to make a speech, she announced with the confidence of someone who had clearly been planning this moment. Sophie, honey, Emily began, but Elon caught her hand, his eyes dancing with amusement. Let her, he whispered. I'm happy, Sophie declared, her voice carrying across the terrace with startling clarity. Before, Mommy was sad all the time, even when she was smiling. And Daddy Elon lived in a big house, but he was lonely. But now we're all together and nobody has to be sad or lonely anymore. She paused, considering her words with the gravity of a politician. Also, Daddy Elon makes really good pancakes, and he doesn't burn them like Mommy does. The laughter that followed was warm and genuine, the kind that comes from hearts too full to contain their joy. Emily felt tears streaming down her cheeks again, but these were different tears. These were the tears of someone who had found her way home. Claire, not to be outdone, scrambled onto her own chair. I want to say something too, she announced. I think Daddy who's in heaven would be happy about this. I think he'd like that we have someone to take care of us and make us laugh. And I think Rachel would be happy too, because now Daddy Elon isn't sad anymore. The silence that followed was profound, filled with the weight of wisdom from someone far too young to possess it. Emily saw Elon wipe away tears of his own, saw the way the other guests looked at these two remarkable children who had somehow found a way to honor the past while embracing the future. As the evening wore on, the celebration took on a life of its own. The children ran barefoot through the garden, their laughter echoing off the stone walls. Mrs. Portman held court at one end of the terrace, regaling anyone who would listen with stories of watching this love story unfold. The adults lingered over wine and conversation, reluctant to let the magic of the evening end. But it was the first dance that Emily would remember most clearly. Elon, who had claimed to have no rhythm, moved with surprising grace as they swayed together under the fairy lights. The song was one they'd chosen together, something about finding your way back home. And as they moved together, Emily felt the last of her walls crumble away. "I love you," she whispered against his ear. "I love you too," he whispered back. "All of you. Forever." When the song ended, they were joined by Sophie and Claire, who had clearly been waiting for their cue. The four of them danced together, a tangle of arms and laughter and pure joy. This was their family now, Emily realized. Imperfect, complicated, beautiful beyond measure. As the night wound down, they found themselves on the terrace steps, looking up at the stars through Elon's telescope. The girls took turns pointing out constellations, their voices soft with wonder and exhaustion. Mrs. Portman had gone home with a kiss on each cheek and a promise to see them soon. The other guests had departed with hugs and well wishes, leaving the four of them alone with the night and each other. Later, as Emily helped the girls into their pajamas and tucked them into their beds, she found Elon in his study, carefully placing something in a drawer. It was the small dollhouse that had started it all, the one Sophie had admired on that first day when they'd been strangers desperate for shelter. "Keeping it?" Emily asked softly. "Always," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "To remember how it all began." Emily leaned against the doorway, watching her husband, still marveling at the word. Her husband, her partner, her love, the man who had seen her at her lowest point and chosen to lift her up instead of turning away. "No regrets?" she asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Only that it took us so long to find each other," he said, pulling her into his arms. "But I suppose that's what second chances are for." Outside, the garden was settling into peaceful darkness, the fairy lights still twinkling like promises made and kept. Inside, a family was complete at last, bound not by blood but by choice, by love, by the profound courage it takes to open your heart again after it's been broken. This was their beginning, Emily realized. Not the end of their story, but the start of a new chapter. And as she fell asleep in Elon's arms, she smiled, knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. 6 months. That's how long it had been since the garden wedding, since the fairy lights and the promises made under the old oak tree. But time, Emily had learned, isn't measured in days or weeks when you're building a life together. It's measured in coffee shared before dawn, in homework supervised at the kitchen table, in the gradual accumulation of small, perfect moments that somehow add up to happiness. The morning ritual had become sacred. Emily would wake to the sound of Elon already in the kitchen, the coffee maker gurgling its familiar greeting to the day. Sophie would pad downstairs in her favorite pajamas, the ones with the dancing unicorns, while Claire would appear fully dressed and ready, her backpack organized with the precision of someone who'd learned early that preparation was armor against uncertainty. "Good morning, beautiful family," Elon would say, and Emily would feel her heart skip just a little, the way it had on their first morning as husband and wife, and every morning since. The house had found its rhythm. School lunches packed with love notes tucked inside. Homework spread across the dining room table like a colorful battlefield. Artwork proudly displayed on the refrigerator, each new masterpiece earning a place of honor among the growing collection. This was what home looked like, Emily realized. Not perfect, never perfect, but alive with the beautiful chaos of a family learning to be together. Elon's transformation continued to amaze everyone who knew him. The man who had once commanded board meetings with ruthless efficiency now found himself sitting in tiny plastic chairs at parent-teacher conferences, his eyes bright with interest as Mrs. Henderson explained Claire's progress in reading, or as Mr. Garcia praised Sophie's creativity in art class. "He asks such thoughtful questions," Mrs. Henderson had whispered to Emily after one particularly involved conference about Claire's advanced reading level. "You can tell he really cares." And he did care. Deeply, completely, in ways that surprised him every day. The spreadsheets and quarterly reports that had once consumed his thoughts were now secondary to school plays and science fair projects, to the urgent need to be present for bedtime stories and scraped knee emergencies. Emily's own blossoming was quieter, but no less profound. Her work at the design company had given her something she'd forgotten she possessed: confidence. Her ideas were valued, her creativity celebrated, her opinion sought. She found herself staying up late not from worry, but from excitement, working on projects that challenged and fulfilled her in ways she'd thought were lost forever. The balance they'd struck was delicate but strong. Elon would drop the girls at school on his way to the office, arriving later than he once had but somehow accomplishing more in less time. Emily would work from home, picking them up in the afternoon, and together they would navigate the beautiful complexity of family life. Rachel's room had evolved into something neither shrine nor erasure, but integration. Her photos sat beside new ones, creating a gallery of love that spanned time. The girls would sometimes go in there to read, curled up in the chair by the window where Rachel had once sat. It felt right, Emily thought, like love continuing rather than ending. The evidence of their happiness was everywhere. In the way Sophie would run to Elon when he came home, launching herself into his arms with the absolute certainty that he would catch her. In the way Claire would seek his help with math homework, her trust in his ability to explain things clearly touching in its completeness. In the way Emily would catch him watching them all sometimes, his face soft with wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe this was his life now. Spring had brought new adventures. The school play where Claire had stolen the show as a talking flower, her clear voice carrying across the auditorium, while Elon recorded every second on his phone. The science fair where Sophie's volcano had erupted with spectacular success, earning her a blue ribbon and a proud hug from her daddy. These were the moments that mattered, Emily realized. Not the grand gestures or the dramatic declarations, but the steady accumulation of pride and joy and shared triumph. Their weekends had become explorations. The Natural History Museum, where the girls had spent hours in the dinosaur exhibit, asking questions that challenged even Elon's considerable knowledge. The park where they'd flown kites until their arms ached, laughing as the wind carried their colorful diamonds across the sky. The lake house, where they'd spent lazy afternoons building sandcastles and collecting smooth stones, creating memories that would outlast any treasure. But it was the quiet moments that Emily treasured most. The way Elon would reach for her hand while they watched the evening news, an unconscious gesture of connection that spoke of deep contentment. The way he would kiss her forehead before leaving for work, a blessing for the day ahead. The way they would lie in bed at night, talking about everything and nothing, their voices soft in the darkness. "Do you ever think about how we found each other?" Emily asked one night, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Every day," he murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her arm. "Sometimes I think about that first day when Sophie saw the dollhouse in my office. How scared you were, how desperate, how I almost didn't offer you the job. But you did. Best decision I ever made." His voice was thick with emotion. "I used to think success was about building something big, something that would last. But I was wrong. Success is this moment, this family, this love we've built together." The town had noticed the change too. At the grocery store, old acquaintances would stop to chat, their faces bright with genuine warmth. "You look so happy," they would say, and Emily would catch Elon's eye and smile, because it was true. They were happy, deeply and completely happy in ways that had nothing to do with circumstances and everything to do with choice. The girls had become the storytellers of their own origin story. At school, during show and tell, they would regale their classmates with tales of the dollhouse that had started it all, of the man who had opened his home to strangers and found family instead. Their pride in their unconventional beginning was infectious, and Emily found herself marveling at their resilience, their ability to turn what could have been shame into celebration. "We were homeless," Sophie would say matter-of-factly, "but then Daddy Elon found us, and now we're home forever." The simplicity of children's truth never failed to move Emily to tears. Her latest project at work had been personal in ways she hadn't expected. An article about second chances commissioned for the company blog had become something deeper. A meditation on loss and recovery, on the courage it takes to love again after heartbreak, on the unexpected ways that healing can come. Sometimes, she had written, the life you're meant to live isn't the one you planned. Sometimes it's the one that finds you when you're not looking, when you're too tired to hope, but too stubborn to give up. Sometimes the family you're meant to have isn't the one you're born into, but the one you choose day after day, moment by moment, with all the messy, complicated, beautiful commitment that choice requires. The words had poured out of her, months of gratitude and wonder finally finding their voice. When the article went live, the response had been overwhelming. Messages from strangers sharing their own stories of second chances, of families found in unexpected places, of love that bloomed in the aftermath of loss. But it was Elon's response that had mattered most. He had read it in his office, tears streaming down his face, and had called her immediately. "You've captured it perfectly," he had said, his voice breaking. "Everything I've felt but couldn't say. You've made it beautiful." Now, as Emily stood in the kitchen on this ordinary Tuesday morning, watching Elon help Sophie with her shoelaces while Claire packed her lunch, she felt the weight of gratitude settle over her like a warm blanket. This was her life now. Not the life she had planned, but the life she had been given. The life she had chosen again and again with every small act of love and trust. Later, when the girls were at school and Elon was at the office, Emily would find herself in his study, looking at the latest addition to their family photo collection. It was a picture from their weekend at the lake, all four of them laughing at something Sophie had said, their faces bright with joy and completely unguarded. Elon had printed it and placed it in a frame on his desk, where he could see it every day, a reminder of what truly mattered. This was their story now. Not the ending, but the beginning. Not the conclusion of their journey, but the opening of a new chapter. And as Emily looked at that photo, at the faces of the people who had become her everything, she knew that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. A family not bound by blood, but by choice, by love, by the profound courage it takes to open your heart again after it's been broken. They had found each other in the darkness, and together they had learned to shine. The morning light filtered through the kitchen window as Emily stared at her coffee, steam rising like gentle whispers of the chaos ahead. Her phone buzzed incessantly with work emails, each notification a small reminder of the delicate balance she was learning to master. The advertising agency demanded her attention at the most inconvenient moments, and today was no different. She had discovered something profound about motherhood and career. It wasn't about perfection. It was about grace under pressure, about finding strength in the spaces between exhaustion and determination. When Sophie ran a fever at 2 a.m, Emily had to make that dreaded call to her boss, her voice steady despite the worry gnawing at her chest. "I'll work from home today," she had said, and surprisingly, the world didn't end. Elon was learning too, in his own quiet way. The man who once commanded boardrooms with unwavering confidence now found himself Googling how to help with third-grade math homework at 11 at night. His large hands, accustomed to signing million-dollar contracts, trembled slightly as he helped Claire with her science project about the solar system. "Daddy, why is Jupiter so big?" Claire had asked, her small fingers tracing the construction paper circles they'd cut together. "Sometimes," Elon had replied, his voice softer than usual, "the biggest things in our universe are also the most beautiful. They protect the smaller planets around them, just like families do." The children were changing too, their innocent eyes beginning to see the effort their parents poured into every ordinary day. Sophie, with her thoughtful nature, started setting the table without being asked. She noticed when Emily's shoulders sagged after long phone calls, and she'd quietly bring her stepmother a glass of water, her small act of kindness speaking volumes about the love growing in their reconstructed home. Claire, ever the spirited one, began leaving little drawings on Elon's desk, stick figures of their family holding hands under a bright yellow sun. "That's us being happy," she'd explain, and Elon would feel his throat tighten with emotion he hadn't expected to feel again. The house itself seemed to exhale with newfound warmth. Gone were the sterile, museum-like rooms that had once reflected Elon's emotional distance. Now puzzle pieces scattered across the coffee table told stories of rainy Sunday afternoons spent together. The kitchen island bore the sweet stains of baking experiments, and the living room couch held the permanent indent of family movie nights. But wasn't always smooth sailing. The night Elon's biggest client threatened to walk away, Emily found him standing in their bedroom, his shoulders rigid with the familiar tension she'd learned to recognize. Her heart ached, remembering the man who used to disappear into his work when stress mounted. "Talk to me," she whispered, her hand finding his. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." And he did talk. For the first time in years, Elon shared his fears about failure, about not being enough, about the weight of providing for everyone he loved. Emily listened, her presence a steady anchor in his storm of worry, and together they found solutions that didn't require him to sacrifice his family for his career. The girls were growing up before their eyes, developing an emotional intelligence that sometimes surprised the adults around them. When Mrs. Portman from next door fell ill, it was Sophie who suggested they make her soup, and Claire who drew her a get-well card with flowers that looked more like colorful explosions but carried the pure intention of a child's love. Mrs. Portman had become more than a neighbor. She was the grandmother figure the girls had never had, the one who remembered their favorite cookies and listened to their school stories with genuine interest. Her presence in their lives was a gift none of them had expected, but all of them treasured. "You know," Claire said one evening as Elon tucked her into bed, "I used to be scared of the dark. But now I know that even when it's scary, morning always comes." Her simple wisdom hit him like a gentle revelation. This child, who had lost her mother so young, was teaching him about hope and resilience. The conversation that followed was one of those magical moments parents treasure, deep, honest, and filled with the kind of truth that only children can speak. Sophie's school essay about heroes had reduced Emily to tears. She had written about Elon not as a successful businessman, but as the man who learned to braid hair and make pancakes shaped like hearts. "My hero," she had written, "is someone who wasn't afraid to start over and learn how to love us better." These moments of recognition, of seeing how their efforts were shaping young hearts, filled Emily with a profound sense of purpose. She realized that the greatest success wasn't measured in career achievements or financial gains, but in the quiet moments when a child felt safe enough to share their dreams, scared enough to ask for comfort, and loved enough to believe in tomorrow. Elon, too, was discovering meaning beyond the boardroom. Inspired by his own journey from isolation to connection, he began supporting local programs for single parents, understanding now the weight they carried and the strength they possessed. His transformation was complete not when he fixed everything, but when he learned to embrace the beautiful imperfection of it all. The family learned to laugh at spilled juice and burned dinners, to celebrate the small victories like successful bedtime routines and homework completed without tears. They learned that Rachel's memory wasn't something to fear, but something to honor, weaving her love into their new traditions and keeping her spirit alive in their stories. As seasons changed and months passed, they discovered that happiness wasn't the absence of challenges, but the daily choice to face them together. In the ordinary moments, the rushed mornings, the tired evenings, the unexpected crises, they found extraordinary love. And in learning to be vulnerable with each other, they built something stronger than any of them had dared to hope for, a family that could weather any storm because they refused to weather it alone. Something extraordinary was happening to Elon, something that rippled far beyond the walls of his home and touched the lives of people he'd never met. Word had spread through business circles about his transformation, not the kind of corporate success story that filled magazines, but something deeper, more human. He was becoming known as the man who chose vulnerability over invincibility, who traded his armor for authenticity. The speaking invitations started arriving like gentle rain after a drought. Corporate conferences wanted him to share his story, but not about profit margins or market strategies. They wanted to hear about second chances, about the courage it takes to rebuild yourself from the inside out. Standing at podiums that once intimidated him, Elon found himself speaking truths he'd never dared to voice before. "I used to think strength meant never showing weakness," he would tell audiences, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "I learned that real strength is showing up every day, even when you're afraid, especially when you're afraid." Emily watched these transformations with a mixture of pride and wonder. Her own career was blossoming in ways she'd never imagined. The articles she'd written about new beginnings had struck a chord with readers across the country. It wasn't just about blended families or second marriages. It was about the courage to start over, to believe in love again when life has taught you to guard your heart. Her editor called it raw and beautiful, and Emily knew the words came from the deepest wells of her experience. She had learned to write not just with her mind, but with her heart wide open, and readers felt that vulnerability in every sentence. The girls were flourishing too, their confidence blooming like flowers in spring. Sophie, once quiet and reserved, was now raising her hand in class, her teacher commenting on her thoughtful contributions to discussions. Claire's laughter echoed through school hallways, her joy infectious, and her spirit uncontainable. They were secure in a way that only comes from knowing you are loved completely, unconditionally. Then came the day they brought home a tiny orange kitten, abandoned and mewing pitifully outside Sophie's classroom. The decision was unanimous and immediate. "Can we keep him?" Claire had asked, her eyes already bright with love for the small creature. "What should we call him?" Emily had wondered aloud, watching as the kitten purred contentedly in Sophie's gentle hands. "Hope," Sophie had whispered, and everyone knew it was perfect. Hope became more than a pet. He became a symbol of their family's capacity to nurture, to take in the lost and make them whole. Elon, who had once filled his life with expensive possessions, found himself more moved by watching his daughter's care for this small, vulnerable creature than by any business triumph he'd ever achieved. The beach trip that summer was a revelation. Miles of golden sand stretched before them, and for the first time in years, Elon felt the luxury of time, real time, unhurried and precious. He watched Emily's hair catch the ocean breeze, saw his daughters building sandcastles with the focused intensity of architects, and felt something settle in his chest that he recognized as peace. "Look, Daddy," Claire called out, holding up a perfect seashell. "It's beautiful because it's broken and mended by the sea." Her innocent observation struck him like lightning. Weren't they all like that shell? Beautiful not despite their brokenness, but because of how they'd been mended by love? Rachel's birthday came with its familiar ache, but this year felt different. Instead of the suffocating grief that had once consumed this day, they created a ritual of remembrance. They lit candles, shared favorite memories, and spoke her name with love rather than sorrow. The girls asked questions about their mother that Elon answered with newfound openness, painting pictures of Rachel's laughter, her terrible cooking, her fierce love for them. "She would have loved Emily," Sophie said quietly, and Elon felt tears prick his eyes. "Yes," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "She would have." It was Claire who brought up Thomas's mother, Susan, her young mind making connections that surprised the adults. "Do you miss her too?" she asked Emily one evening, her question innocent but profound. Emily's heart swelled with tenderness for this perceptive child. "I do miss her," she admitted. "She gave me the most precious gift. She made Thomas who he is. And Thomas brought me to your daddy, who brought me to you." These conversations taught them all that love doesn't diminish when shared, that honoring the past doesn't diminish the present. Their hearts were large enough to hold all their stories, all their loves, all their losses. Friends began to notice the change in them, the way they moved through the world as a unit, complete yet still growing. "You've created something special," their neighbor Mrs. Portman told them one evening. "Not just a family, but a sanctuary." The dinner party they hosted to thank their community became legendary among their circle. Emily's cooking filled the house with warmth. Elon's genuine conversations drew people in, and the girls' easy laughter created an atmosphere of pure joy. But it was the surprise video Sophie and Claire had created that brought everyone to tears. Frame by frame, they had documented their journey from tentative first meetings to confident family moments. Their young voices narrated the story of how love had rebuilt their world, how for separate people had become one unbreakable unit. There wasn't a dry eye in the house as they watched their own transformation through the innocent eyes of children. That night, as Emily and Elon stood in their kitchen washing dishes side by side, the house finally quiet, Elon realized something profound. "This is home," he said quietly. "Not the address, not the building. This feeling, this life we've built together, this is home." Emily's hands stilled in the soapy water. She looked around at the lived-in warmth of their kitchen, at the children's artwork magnet to the refrigerator, at Hope the kitten sleeping contentedly in his favorite corner. This wasn't the pristine showcase the house had once been. It was better. It was alive with love, messy with living, beautiful with imperfection. "I never thought I could love again," she whispered. "Not like this. Not this deeply." Elon's arms wrapped around her from behind, and they stood there in the quiet kitchen, marveling at the miracle of second chances. The expensive artwork on the walls seemed less important now than the crayon drawings. The designer furniture mattered less than the worn spots where their family gathered each evening. On the shelf in the living room, the small dollhouse Emily had bought for Claire remained in its place of honor. It had started as a simple gift, but it had become something more, a reminder that the smallest gestures can change everything, that love begins with the courage to try, and that sometimes the most broken people can build the most beautiful families. Their story wasn't finished. It was just beginning, written in shared meals and bedtime stories, in scraped knees kissed better, and dreams whispered in the dark. They had learned that happiness isn't a destination but a choice made new each day, and they chose it together, over and over again. The garden had never looked more beautiful. A year of love and laughter had transformed it from a pristine showcase into something alive, breathing, real. Rose bushes climbed the trellises with wild abandon, their petals scattered like confetti on the emerald grass. The morning sun filtered through the oak tree's branches, casting dancing shadows that seemed to celebrate along with them. Emily stood at the bedroom window, watching Sophie and Claire arrange chairs in careful rows, their small hands busy with ribbons and flowers. They had insisted on helping with every detail of the vow renewal ceremony, their excitement infectious and pure. "It has to be perfect for Mommy, Emily, and Daddy," Claire had declared, and somehow, through their loving eyes, everything already was. The white dress hanging in the closet was nothing like the elaborate gown Emily had worn to her first wedding. This one was simple, elegant, chosen not for its price tag, but for the way it made her feel, like herself, only more so. Like a woman who had learned to love again, who had discovered that second chances could be even more precious than first ones. In the bathroom, Elon adjusted his tie for the third time, his hands trembling slightly with emotion rather than nerves. He had faced hostile boardrooms and million-dollar negotiations with steady composure, but the thought of speaking his heart in front of the people who mattered most made his pulse quicken. The vows he had written and rewritten lay folded in his jacket pocket, words that had poured from a soul finally unguarded. "Daddy, you look handsome," Sophie said, appearing in the doorway with her hair freshly braided, wearing the pale yellow dress she had chosen especially for this day. Her smile was radiant, and Elon felt his heart swell with a love so profound it threatened to overwhelm him. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he replied, kneeling to her level. "Are you ready to help us promise to love each other forever?" She nodded solemnly, clutching the small velvet box that held their new rings. "I practiced with Claire. We won't drop them, we promise." The ceremony began as the afternoon sun reached its golden peak. Mrs. Portman sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, her presence a warm reminder of how community and love could expand beyond blood relations. Friends from work, neighbors who had become family, and even some of Elon's business colleagues had gathered to witness this celebration of renewal. When Emily walked down the makeshift aisle between the flower-lined chairs, she wasn't given away by her father. She walked confidently on her own, a woman who had found her way back to love through her own courage and grace. The garden seemed to hold its breath as she approached Elon, who stood beneath the rose arbor with tears already glistening in his eyes. "A year ago," Elon began, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to crack it, "I thought I knew what love was. I thought it was possession, protection, providing. But you taught me that love is presence. It's showing up every day, not just for the celebrations, but for the ordinary moments that make up a life." His words carried across the garden like a prayer, touching every heart present. "You took my brokenness and saw beauty. You took my daughters and loved them as your own. You took my guarded heart and made it whole again. Emily, you are my miracle, my second chance, my forever." Emily's own vows trembled on her lips as she looked into the eyes of the man who had transformed from stranger to soulmate. "Elon, you taught me that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone perfect for you. You showed me that families aren't just born, they're built, with patience and hope and the courage to try again." Her voice grew stronger as she continued, "You healed wounds I didn't even know were bleeding. You gave me daughters who call me mom, and mean it. You gave me a home that's not just a house, but a sanctuary of love. Today, I don't just promise to love you, I promise to keep building this beautiful life with you, one day at a time." Sophie and Claire stepped forward with the rings, their young faces serious with the importance of their task. As the adults exchanged these new symbols of commitment, the girls beamed with pride, understanding in their hearts that this ceremony was about all of them, that love was multiplying, not dividing. The garden erupted in applause as Emily and Elon kissed, sealing their promises under the bower of roses that had bloomed more abundantly this year than ever before. Even the flowers seemed to celebrate, their petals catching the afternoon breeze and swirling around the new family like nature's own confetti. The reception was deliberately simple, a picnic on the grass with sandwiches and lemonade, strawberries and cake. Children ran between the adults, their laughter mixing with conversation and the gentle hum of contentment. Hope the kitten wove between legs, purring and accepting treats from willing hands, as much a part of the celebration as anyone. As evening approached and the guests began to leave, the family found themselves alone in their transformed garden. The telescope that had once symbolized Elon's isolation now brought them together as they took turns peering at the stars emerging in the darkening sky. "Look," Claire whispered, pointing at a particularly bright star. "That's Mommy Rachel watching us be happy." Elon's throat tightened as he lifted her to the telescope's eyepiece. "Yes, sweetheart. I think she's very proud of the family we've become." Inside the house, the small dollhouse still sat on its shelf, a reminder of how this entire journey had begun. Emily had noticed Elon pausing to look at it earlier, his expression thoughtful and grateful. Such a simple gesture, buying a toy for a sad little girl, had set in motion a chain of events that had transformed all their lives. "Do you think," Claire asked later as they sat on the porch swing, "if Tommy had lived, and if Rachel was still here, would we all be friends?" It was one of those profound questions that children ask so naturally, cutting straight to the heart of complex emotions. Elon considered it carefully before answering. "I think," he said slowly, "that love has a way of bringing the right people together, even when the path is difficult. In a way, they're both here with us, Tommy in your mom's heart, Rachel in mine. And all of that love helped create this family." Emily's eyes glistened as she listened to her husband navigate these delicate conversations with such wisdom and grace. The man who had once been afraid of vulnerability now spoke of love and loss with the confidence of someone who had learned that feeling deeply was the only way to live fully. As they prepared for bed that night, Emily and Elon stood on their bedroom balcony, looking out at the city, lights twinkling in the distance. The house behind them was quiet, filled with the peaceful breathing of sleeping children and the contented purr of a cat who had found his forever home. "What do you dream about now?" Emily asked softly, remembering the driven, restless man she had first met. Elon wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her close. "Simple things," he replied. "Watching the girls grow up, growing old with you, maybe traveling together when they're older, teaching them to drive, walking them down the aisle someday if they want that." He paused, his voice growing thick with emotion. "I used to dream about conquering the world. Now I dream about being present for the small moments that make up a life. That's what you taught me, Emily. That the extraordinary is hidden in the ordinary, and love is what reveals it." She leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "I want to write about this," she said quietly. "About second chances and blended families, and the courage it takes to love again. I think there are other people out there who need to know it's possible." "Then write it," he encouraged. "Tell them that healing isn't about forgetting the past, but about making room for the future. Tell them that love multiplies, it doesn't divide." As they stood there in the quiet darkness, wrapped in each other's arms and surrounded by the life they had built together, Elon reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Money had bought him success, but it had never bought him happiness. Power had given him influence, but it had never given him peace. Love, messy, complicated, vulnerable love, had given him everything that truly mattered. The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had once seemed so distant and cold. Now they felt like witnesses to a miracle, the simple miracle of four broken people who had found each other and become whole. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities to choose love over fear. But tonight, they were exactly where they belonged, home, together, forever. And so we close this chapter of four hearts that found each other in the most unexpected way. But perhaps that's how real love works. It doesn't follow our timelines or our plans. It arrives when we're broken, when we think we have nothing left to give, and somehow creates something beautiful from fragments of who we used to be. Elon discovered that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in bedtime stories and scraped knees kissed better. Emily learned that second chances aren't just possible, they're miraculous when we have the courage to reach for them. And two little girls found that families aren't defined by blood alone, but by the daily choice to love unconditionally. What would you have done in their place? When life stripped away everything you thought you needed, would you have had the courage to start again? When faced with someone else's children, someone else's grief, someone else's complicated past, would you have opened your heart wide enough to make room for it all? These aren't easy questions, and perhaps that's exactly why they matter. Because somewhere in your own life, there's a moment waiting, a chance to choose love over fear, vulnerability over safety, hope over cynicism. The question isn't whether you deserve a second chance. The question is, will you be brave enough to take it? This story reminds us that healing isn't about forgetting our scars. It's about learning to see them as proof of our strength. That love doesn't diminish when shared but multiplies beyond our wildest dreams. And that sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the smallest gestures of kindness. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe in the possibility of new beginnings, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit that like button if you believe in second chances, and follow us for more stories that remind us what it means to be beautifully, imperfectly human. Because in a world that often feels broken, we all need to be reminded that love still has the power to heal, to transform, and to create miracles in the most ordinary moments of our lives.